Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD bodybuilder, back with another video. Should you bulk, cut, or recomp? This is one of the most common questions in bodybuilding, and today I'll be shedding some light on the topic. Often when people first get into bodybuilding, they aren't sure if they should first try and gain weight, lose weight, or keep their weight stable. And I pretty commonly get asked about what you should do if you're skinny fat. Skinny fat is when you don't have a lot of muscle, but you also have a considerable amount of body fat. Quick outline for today, we're going to start off by introducing bulking and cutting and body recomposition, which is the process of building muscle and losing fat at the same time. After that, we'll talk about the optimal body fat percentage, which is a really important concept to understand if we're going to decide on whether we're going to increase, decrease, or keep our calories the same. Lastly, I'll put everything together to give you some recommendations on whether you should try and bulk and cut or recomp depending on your current body fat percentage as well as your level of experience. This discussion will be focused primarily for people who want to build muscle and lose fat. That is, your goal is aesthetics. If you've been getting value from my channel, make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. Okay, let's start off by talking about body recomposition, which is the process of building muscle and losing fat at the same time. Now, body recomposition doesn't apply to everyone. There are specific groups of people who are able to achieve it. Specifically, this can work for people who are beginners or in their first 1 to 2 years of serious training. Next, it can work for people who are returning from a layoff from training, and it can also happen if you're making significant improvements to your training and diet programming. The overarching principle behind these first 3 criteria are that you're presenting a novel and superior stimulus to what you were doing before. Lastly, people who are obese can also body recomp. The idea is that these people have a lot of extra calories in the form of body fat, so when they burn fat, they can use those calories to help build muscle. Now, how do you achieve body recomposition? Your training is for the most part going to be the same as if you were going for a bulk, and your protein will stay the same as well. The main thing that you'll be changing is your calorie intake. There's new research now saying that people can probably recomp over a pretty wide range of calorie deficits. So to recomp, you would set your calories to maintenance or up to a 1.5% body weight loss per week calorie deficit. I like to quantify the amount of surplus or deficit in terms of your body weight change per week. So in the lower limit of calories, you could lose up to 1.5% of your body weight per week and still achieve body recomposition, which is a really wide range. Now, why doesn't everyone just recomp forever? The problem is that it becomes harder with more experience. As a beginner, you will get good results going for a body recomposition approach. However, as you become more experienced, you won't be able to recomp in as big a deficit, and it will get harder overall. And eventually you won't be able to recomp at all. So after that, you'll want to switch to bulking and cutting. Now let's talk about bulking and cutting, which is the process of going through structured weight gain and weight loss phases. The idea is that when you gain weight, you're going to put on muscle, but also some fat. Now, it's relatively hard for your body to put on muscle, but it's relatively easy for it to burn fat. So when you go through cutting phases, you can drop the fat and hold onto your muscle and then repeat. Now the thing is, being in a calorie surplus is really helpful for your body for hypertrophy. Because of this, bulking and cutting will likely give you faster results, especially beyond the early beginner stage. And eventually it will become necessary for optimal hypertrophy results. Okay, now let's talk about the optimal body fat percentage. This is going to be really important for us to understand when we start talking about whether we want to start off in a calorie surplus, maintenance, or a deficit. My current recommendation is that you should shoot for about 10 to 15% body fat for men most of the time, and about 17 to 25% for women. These are relatively low body fat percentages. Okay, let's talk about the reasoning behind my recommendations. We'll do a head-to-head comparison of the advantages of staying at a low body fat versus a higher body fat percentage. Now, starting off with the pros of the low body fat argument, which is what I recommend. Traditionally, bodybuilders talk about having a better P ratio when your body fat is lower. P ratio stands for partitioning ratio, which is basically how much muscle versus fat you put on when you're bulking. A lot of bodybuilders will say that when you're lean, you're in a better position to put on muscle rather than fat. First of all, this is not true if you're going into an unhealthy range of low body fat percentage, like less than 10% for males and less than 17% for females. And there's some new research suggesting that there's probably not much of a difference between 10 to 20% for men and about 17 to 28% for females. However, there is some indirect evidence suggesting that it might be better to aim for a lower body fat percentage since it might optimize your hormonal profile and decrease inflammation. But the evidence is not strong in this regard. Next point is that when you're at a lower body fat percentage, this tends to be more aesthetic when your clothes are off. I think a lot of people enjoy the look that they have when they're lean, and I think it's important to take your personal preferences into account. Next, staying at a low body fat percentage helps you to track your progress. This is an underrated point and people don't usually talk about this, but I think that it's helpful for men to keep sight of their abs and for women to have a slim waist, because it makes it easier to see where your body fat is sitting and you're better able to gauge how much muscle you're putting on versus fat. Once you lose sight of your abs or you start to have a gut, it's really hard to estimate how much fat you're putting on, and you can easily put on a lot of fat and not notice it. Once you get out of this range, it becomes really hard to estimate your body fat percentage accurately. Lastly, being on the lower end of body fat is probably healthier. This comes as a personal recommendation from me. I think anything under 20% for men and 28% for females is going to be fine from a health perspective. However, I recommend that you stay in the lowest range of body fat where you're performing well and feel healthy, because being lean typically equates to better health outcomes overall. Now, the argument for going to a higher body fat percentage. First of all, this may help with strength training. A lot of people find that they get better strength results when they're at a higher body fat percentage. Next, when you're at a higher body fat percentage, you can typically be more relaxed with your diet. However, I will note that this isn't that big a factor. As you get used to counting macros and planning your nutrition, staying at a leaner body fat percentage really isn't that hard, because your maintenance calories isn't that much different than if you were a few pounds heavier. This is assuming that we're staying in a healthy body fat percentage range. Lastly, some people might argue that being at a higher body fat percentage is more aesthetic because you look bulkier when you have your clothes on. Okay, now that we've established our optimal body fat percentage range, let's give you some recommendations. These recommendations will mainly hinge off of that body fat percentage range, because it will determine your calorie intake. Now, instead of thinking about bulking and cutting and recomp as separate entities, I want to note that for beginners, recomp and cutting actually overlap a lot. In fact, if you watch my mini cut video, you'll see that my recommendations for the range of calorie deficits actually overlap with my body recomposition recommendations. So instead of thinking about fat loss or body recomposition as separately, I think you can see them as overlapping entities, but it's just the fact that you're only able to recomp under certain conditions. Now, starting off with our first body fat category, if you're 10 to 15% for men or 17 to 25% for women, then I recommend that you can either go for maintenance or surplus calories. This will depend somewhat on your goals and your level of experience. If you're a beginner or if you satisfy those other criteria for body recomposition, if your goal is to stay lean, then you could stick with maintenance calories. Now, if you want the fastest muscle growth possible, then I would suggest going into a surplus. And when you're going into calorie surplus, I recommend lean bulking. My current recommendations for lean bulking are that you aim for a 1 to 1.5% body weight gain per month for beginners, and 0.5 to 1% of your body weight gained per month for intermediate or more advanced athletes. Now let's talk about the more intermediate body fat percentage range. If you're between 15 to 20% for males or around 24 to 28% for females, then you can either go for maintenance or a deficit, depending on your goals. For this group, I typically only suggest maintenance calories if you meet the criteria for body recomposition. Remember, the goal is to stay in that optimal body fat percentage range, which is below this. But if you're able to recomp, you can stay at maintenance calories and still lose fat and build muscle at the same time, and you'll eventually get to that body fat percentage range. You should go for the body recomposition / maintenance calories route here if your primary goal is to look bigger. For most people, however, I do recommend going straight into a deficit. This is because you'll get results faster, plus if you meet the criteria for body recomposition, you're still going to be able to recomp in a deficit. I typically recommend mini cuts for fat loss, which are 2 to 8 week short aggressive diets. And you can aim for somewhere between 0.5 to 1.5% of your body weight lost per week. The last category here is if you're greater than 20% body fat for men or more than 28% body fat for females. In this case, my recommendation is that you go right into a deficit so that you can get all the advantages of the lower body fat that we talked about earlier. My overarching recommendation is that you aim to stay in the lowest comfortable body fat percentage range for you. I do recommend a pretty low optimal body fat percentage range, but the exact percentage will vary by person. What's a comfortable body fat percentage range? I typically define this as a range where you're not having any negative health side effects. So you should not be food focused. That is, you shouldn't be feeling starved all the time and constantly be thinking about food. Having a flexible diet strategy where you still allow yourself treats sometimes will help with this. But most people will find that when they get to extreme levels of lean, they'll be really food focused. Next, you should be in a body fat percentage where you have normal sleep, mood, and libido. For females, you should be having normal periods. And these are just markers of your body functioning well. Lastly, you should be in a place where you're having good training performance. Once you do get into that optimal body fat percentage range, I recommend that you go for a lean bulk interspersed with mini cuts. So if body fat percentage is on the y-axis, time is on the x-axis, and your optimal body fat percentage range is within these dotted lines, then you'll want to lean bulk until you get to the upper end of that optimal body fat percentage range, then mini cut down to the lower end, and then repeat. Once you get to your optimal body fat percentage range, if you're having good results with body recomposition, then you can continue to do that. When your progress starts to slow down, then you might want to switch to a bulk and cut strategy. That's all for now, guys. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like the video and leave me a comment below. In particular, what body fat percentage do you usually stay at? Let me know. If you want to learn how to mini cut properly, check out these videos where I walk you through step by step how to set up a mini cut and also show you what I eat during my mini cuts. If you've been getting value from my channel, make sure you subscribe and share the channel with your fitness friends so they can benefit from it too. See you next time.